Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and I have on the line Mr. Dave Hodges, who is the publisher of the Common Sense Show, and he's also a great radio host. Dave, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good, Rory. Good to be with you.
Well, I'm really glad that you're here. We've got a lot to talk about, and it's just get right on with it. And what correlation between the push for a cashless society and Jade Helm do you see, or are they connected at all?
Well, if they are connected, it's because there will be an economic collapse and the move that will well, let's put it this way. The transition between where we're at now with a cash society to a cashless society is what will come out of an economic collapse. And as they like to say in globalist language, you must destroy the old so you can bring out the new. Out of chaos comes order. And I do believe that Jade Helm will be used, or some successor of Jade Helm in the same genre will be used to enforce this transition.
So do you think that they're going to be successful in pushing us into a cashless society?
I think yes and no. I think yes from the standpoint that you won't be able to pull a $5 bill out of your wallet and spend it as you do now, but no in terms of the fact that people will rebel and you'll see trading and bartering becoming rampant.
That's what I think too. That's what I've been saying, that there will be an absolute explosion in the black market and the gray market as well. I think that they'll take over because people they're not just going to willingly give up their cash. There's too many transactions currently that are done with cash, and people aren't just going to hand it over and say, well, I'm done with that.
I totally agree.
So, and as far as Jade Helm, a big part of Jade Helm's stated purpose is citizen assimilation. And we're seeing assimilation everywhere. We're getting information from around you in particular are getting information from around the country. And I have to commend you on your call to arms, or call to, people send in information to you. I think that's really great. And I'm sure that you're getting overwhelmed with that. But
I love it.
yeah.
I so appreciate the listening audience doing that. In fact, we've actually run ads on the website asking people to send us their pictures and videos.
Yes.
My research carried me so far. I was able to uncover documents, link it to other important documents that showed people this is the context of what we're dealing with. But that only carries you to a certain point. There's nothing like on the ground, first person eyewitnesses with proof.
Yes. And there was, I don't know if you saw this or not, but Lisa Haven a couple of days ago posted some information with some photographs of some howitzers that were moving through Mississippi. And there was also I don't know, I can't remember who it was in Michigan, if it was if it was the National Guard or if it was local sheriffs, but they had put out information saying, don't be alarmed. There's going to be explosions at 1 a.m. It's okay. It's all good. And this is all part of their assimilation. I mean, how in the world can we accept that? I mean, as far as we're gonna be blowing things up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you guys just don't worry about it. It's all good. We got it under control. I mean, should the fine folks of Michigan be accepting that?
No, absolutely not. The whole Jade Helm drill, as they call it, is unconstitutional on its face, and it violates posse comitatus and a whole bunch of other regulations that govern our Constitution. And I am, as an American, personally insulted. The American people are nowhere near moving to revolutionary status. We're not on the verge of a civil war, although this could provoke a move in this direction and may actually cause a civil war, what they're planning to do to us. But this is totally a provocative move on the part of the Obama administration, misusing our military in violation of the law. And I believe that Obama is trying to force a confrontation so he has a pretext to declare martial law.
I kind of get that feeling as well. I mean, because if you push far enough, then there's going to be at some point there will be resistance, and then as soon as that resistance shows up, then he can move it to the next stage.
Well, I look at this in terms of what's coming as kind of like the Boston Massacre. Once American blood was spilled, the end result was inevitable. And that's where we're headed. I think that's where we're headed. We're looking for an incident. I mean, they can't play war in the middle of our communities and drop in at 3 a.m., detonate explosives in urban areas without affecting people. Something's going to happen. People are going to be harmed. And that's when some people are going to say enough is enough. And some of the patriot groups are going to, I predict they'll stand up, and I predict there'll be confrontation, and that could set off a chain reaction across the country.
Well, do you think that something like what happened in Waco, that you and in the interview that you just did with Steve Quayle, you guys were talking about that being a false flag event? Do you see something along those lines being brought to the fore again, maybe on a larger scale or in a different location, or multiple situations happening at one time?
Rory, I agree. It's multiple locations at one time. This is how I think they're going to push people over the edge. And to me, Jade Helm is a push them over the edge kind of move. If you look at the personnel involved in Jade Helm, on one hand, you've got Special Operations Forces, Green Beret, Navy SEALs, and so forth. Their job is basically pre-combat exercise. This is what they're designed to do. They drop into communities or sneak into communities. They destroy command and control. And the second thing they do, and this is where Americans need to be concerned, is they extract people. They either act as death squads and assassinate high-value targets, or they kidnap them. Why are they practicing to do this on American soil? And then the second part of Jade Helm is you have the use of conventional forces like the 82nd Airborne. And the 82nd Airborne is traditional military, and their job would be to encircle a particular area and enforce martial law. So those are the two purposes as I see Jade Helm taking, and everything that's happened since my initial analysis has served to confirm this. And I'm saying to the government, what have the people done to deserve this exercise being practiced against them?
And it seems like that it's just all over the country. I mean, and where does it go from here? I mean, we've got howitzers in Mississippi. We've got explosions up north. I mean, what's next, Dave? I mean, where what are your reports telling you is the next step in the unfolding of this nightmare?
I think they're waiting for a provocative incident, or there's going to be a false flag or a series of false flags. My number one candidate for a false flag is an economic failure. And they can bring that about by a cyber attack upon the banks. Lord knows that FEMA and DHS, as well as the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, going back to November of 2014, have practiced these events over and over and over. And, Rory, you can't deny that on November 10th of 2014, well publicized, you have Janet Yellen, you have the head of the FDIC meeting with the Bank of England people, Bank of London people in England, and they're practicing for widespread bank failure. Why? It's where I think this is headed, and an economic collapse will necessitate the use of troops on the ground, because most people have 3 days of food, and by the end of the first or second day, you're not going to be able to get any food from the grocery store. 911 will be overwhelmed, and will have the need for martial law, which I believe would be declared on the third day.
Do you think that we're currently setting up either China, Korea, or Russia, or a combination of the three for this bank black flag or false flag?
Well, we have multiple treaty agreements, and I say we, the U.S. government, with foreign entities, including the United Nations, In times of civil unrest, foreign nations are obligated to bring in troops to help suppress any civil unrest. And that includes Canada. And the Canadians have actually done joint drills dating back to March and April along the Canadian border with some of our forces for this specific purpose. The Chinese, our troops are coming in and are they're taking shape and forming in what they call these inland ports. In fact, the Bundy Ranch affair was an attempt to build a solar farm inland port over rich mineral resources the Chinese could access deep beneath the earth on the Bundy Ranch, and the BLM was trying to facilitate this. And what they wanted to do was also to bring in military. And it's a Chinese sneaky way. And then the Chinese, we know now, are in control of the Long Beach port, and they can bring in anything. And there's no one there to check what they're doing. I mean, China, if they were so inclined right now, could bring in a nuclear weapon to the Long Beach port, and I do not believe we could detect it. We'd have no means because they control the offloading.
Really? I didn't know that.
I've had a couple of YouTube videos to that effect.
Okay.
Investigative reporters finding that. I published one of those, sometime within the last week. And forgive me, I don't remember the article that it's in right now without it in front of me. But Long Beach Port basically has ceded itself to Chinese authority, to Chinese companies. And by the way, all these companies, going back to the solar energy group that was on the Bundy Ranch, they're actually as a front group for the Chinese military. It gets crazy.
But
what
why,
we're seeing.
why is it that every time that I turn on the TV or the radio that I'm hearing that, or even from Reuters and all of the other online mainstream media publications that, Obama or the State Department has made accusations against China or Russia or Korea as far as attacking us, either in a cyber attack or posturing for, hot war. I mean, the whole situation with the in the South China Sea right now. I mean, and that's been ongoing, and there's been things that have been said that the Obama administration has fired at them, verbally, and the relentless attacks against Russia and Putin in particular. I mean, it seems like that they're trying desperately to set up one of these nations as the fall guy for a false flag. Or am I wrong in that?
I think it's very possible. I think there's a lot of white noise out there right now. My scenario for the unfolding is this. I think overridingly we need to remember the final goal of the globalists, as they write it in their own words, is 90% depopulation of the planet. That's their final. And I think we need to keep that in mind as I lay out this scenario. And then secondly, they want to have unification of economic structure and governmental structure. They want the one world government, the one world economy that they're in total control of. And as a sidebar to this, what they write about through people like Ray Kurzweil, the Rockefellers, Rothschilds are on board with this. They want transhumanism, morph the human race so the elite can live immortal lives. So keep all that in mind as I lay this part out. The first thing you have to do to accomplish this goal, your first step, is to take down the United States, because we're not totally the bastion of freedom, but whatever represents freedom on this planet, we are the last bastion of it, to paraphrase Ronald Reagan. So you must take down the United States. This is what I believe Jade Helm or a Jade Helm successor drill will actually do. And the plan is false flag, martial law, complete subjugation of the country so that people won't be brought into World War III kicking and screaming. And World War III will be a war of depopulation. and a war of economic and political unification. And this is where I think this is all headed. And then the globalists also give us clues into the documents that they've actually put out. Mike Krulig, who was Obama's first community advisor, as Obama had his first semi-real job, he heads a group called Building One America, which is the Agenda 21 Nazification of our cities. And on the website, America2050.org, Krulig's people, now Krulig, by the way, is still an advisor to the president, and these Agenda 21 policies are going into place as I speak, in places like San Francisco, New York, Fort Collins, Colorado, Austin, and so forth. Now, what is happening now is that Krulig has displayed maps on his website, America2050.org, and it shows the high-speed bullet train routes, Agenda 21, wilderness areas. And he also shows that the United States will be divided into 11 super mega region metropolises. And what they'll do is they'll have 6 million people each. And I've written about this pretty extensively.
Yes.
6 million people each for 11 regions means that somewhere we're missing 250 million Americans. And this is where I believe this is all headed. We're going to see the stack and pack apartments, the intense urbanization of this country. In fact, if people really want to know what the wilderness is going to look like, watch the first 30 minutes of the original Hunger Games movie, and you see the high-speed bullet train moving in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Well, that's where this is headed. Krulig is acting on behalf of the president. And by the way, this depopulation scheme, Rory, is also present in something called Deagle.com. And Deagle is a front for the CIA. And I'm not going to go into all the ways that I know this, but they're connected to everybody on the who's who that the CIA cavorts with, as well as the United Nations. And Deagle, by the year 2025, projects the American population to be 66 million people.
Yes.
So we've got two primetime references here with direct connections to the administration calling for a 90% reduction of the American population.
Are they going to move the centralized government out to the Denver airport? Is that what's going on? Is that what's going on there?
Well, we know that a lot of CIA operations have moved there, and we also know that the NSA has moved to Utah for all intents and purposes. So, are they moving out of D.C.? Well, it seems that some of the intelligence apparatus has, but I don't know that we can conclude that the entire administration is going to move. I don't see enough evidence to make a blanket statement. But what they're doing makes sense if it's going to be followed up by more agency moves, because they may expect Washington, D.C. to be destroyed in some manner. That's what a lot of people think. I just don't think there's enough evidence to conclude that is what's going to happen.
I mean, it seems like that they're getting ready for something major to happen here on American soil with the reopening, I should say, of, was that Cheyenne Mountain?
Yes, right, Cheyenne Mountain, and yeah, you've got. Let's go back. I was going to say, let's go back to the year 2011.
Okay.
And they had Operation Mountain Guardian in Denver, and they shut down Denver International Airport for 2 days. Obama and several of the elite disappeared. Who knows where they went? The theory is they flew into Denver and went into the tunnels under DIA. And DIA is connected to Cheyenne Mountain by tunnel. It's about 80, 85 miles. And the thinking that's where the elite went. Now, on the ground, on the surface, you had DHS, FEMA, and selected members of the military carrying out disaster drills at Sports Authority Field where the Denver Broncos NFL football team plays. What was really bizarre about this drill is on the morning of the drill, school was in session, the Denver elementary schools, for about 30 minutes. And DHS started showing up and taking kids without notification to parents to Mile High Stadium They hired actors to try to break down the resistance of guards to let parents into the stadium. Now, these weren't the real parents, but all hell broke loose around noon, 1 o'clock, as parents would show up early to remove a child from school for a dental appointment or something else. What? My kid's not here? Oh, and then the Denver area just was inflamed over this.
I remember it well.
Aaron Dykes, when he was with InfoWars, did an outstanding job of covering these fake parents in the parking lot of Sports Authority Field, and he covered this drill pretty extensively. I think that was a precursor of what's to come. The elite hide, and we have chaos above the ground, and I believe that's what's coming. Cheyenne Mountain, I think, is proof to this. But we have underground tunnels all through this country. The elite have no shortage of hiding places.
No, they do not. There are a great number of people calling for something strange to happen, and there's any number of scenarios that are floating around out there. Something to happen in the second half of this year. And will America be the same dysfunctional, slipping into totalitarian police state, or will we have fallen into the abyss by mid, early, or early to mid 2016? Where do you see us headed to, Dave?
It depends on what the military does. If
Okay.
the military has a change of hearts and they jump sides en masse and oppose the foreign troops that are here, along with the DHS that has armed themselves with 2,700 armored vehicles, as well as 2.5 billion rounds of ammunition. If we get opposition from the military, I think the other side has a big problem. And this could actually put us in, I've seen a lot of projections on this, and I've written about this. We could actually go into decades-long guerrilla-type warfare in this country. And a lot of people are projecting, a lot of military sources are projecting that's where this is probably headed. The original thinking is that in the early days of, say Jade Helm goes live, in the early days, most of the military will carry out their orders and act against the American people. But in time, you're going to start to see many units say, no, sir, we're not doing that. And you'll even see commanders doing it. And the other side knows this, and this is something I haven't talked a lot about, but I have printed it one time. Two of my military sources cut their teeth on special operations. They know people who are operationally in charge of Jade Helm, and what they have privately expressed is that this drill is so compartmentalized that they don't know what the long-range ramifications of this drill are. Now, I've had this discussion with my sources. Why would you keep the leadership of a drill like this in the dark? And what we all came up with, and we're all in agreement, that the actions that are going to be taken against the American people are so horrific that if the military had time to contemplate them and cognitively dwell on them, you would see mutinies before the event ever happened. So what they want to do is bring the troops to the battlefield, so to speak, with no knowledge of what they're going to be asked to do. So in the moment of decision, they're given an order with very little time to think. That's why I think in the initial days of the crackdown that's coming, you will see troops acting against American people. It'll be a very dangerous time. But over time, I do believe American military units will shift and jump sides.
Do you think that that's why we're seeing so much military activity around the country? I mean, even, I've spoken to you about what's happening here in Nashville, where I live. I mean, as far as the National Guard, I mean, they've got these drills that are continually going on. They've been going on. And I spoke with the media director for the National Guard here in Nashville, and as soon as I mentioned Jade Helm, our conversation changed. Up until that point, everything was light and pretty carefree. He was very cooperative, answering all my questions and explaining to me, what was going on. And as soon as I mentioned Jade Helm, it became yes and no answers, and his demeanor changed completely. And it was very telling to me. But there was another drill that was going on over in Knoxville, Tennessee, with a combination of the National Guard and local police specifically for civil unrest, riot control. That's what the drill was for. I mean, are you hearing a lot of this going on? And is
Yes,
that what's happening?
unquestionably, that's what's happening. There was a briefing done by a private contractor. Oh, did this make the military people I know mad? This guy's last name was Meade, and his first name has just jumped out of my head. But he did a briefing to the Big Spring City Council,
Yes.
and he was convincing them this is why you shouldn't be concerned. We come in and we're disrupting your lives and scaring the heck out of old people and that kind of thing. He said, it's okay. It's really okay. We're only in 7 states. And, it's funny in the briefing, this is what a moron this guy was. He said, here are the 7 states. And he went through Texas, Oklahoma, Nevada, Mexico, Colorado, California, Arizona. And then he said something. He says, well, we're also going to have the Navy SEALs training in Louisiana. Well, wait a minute. Louisiana wasn't on the Jade Helm map. And I'm thinking, do you realize you just made yourself into a liar? And then we have the extraction drills practiced by Jade Helm on March 27th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on that real famous video.
Yep.
That's probably run on 10,000 websites. The Jade Helm is in all 50 states. I got proof of it in Hawaii. I've had emails from every state in the union showing me Jade Helm activity. So they say it's 7 states. It only goes from July 15th to September 15th. Well, that's not true because we know they started on March 27th. This whole scenario has been nothing but a pack of lies to the American people about the scope of Jade Helm. First, they said, well, it only involves 1,200 troops. Well, wait a minute. You've got a related drill under the Jade Helm umbrella in Colorado at Fort Carson, where they've taken basically every armored vehicle and tank off the base, rolled them across the Pinon Canyon, virgin prairie land, wrecking that land that belongs to ranchers. And these ranchers will never be compensated. And they've taken 4,000 of their troops and had them accompany the drill, yet we're told it's only 1,200. I mean, just one other lie on top of all the other lies that they've told. The military is being mobilized and moved everywhere. I just got a report that at Fort Bragg, they've moved so many of the troops out that the supporting aircraft wing at Pope Air Force Base, which serves to support Fort Bragg, has also been redeployed to unknown areas. And I'm getting this from people, 3 different people who don't even know that the other 2 wrote to me saying, yeah, it's such and such a church, and I've left the church out of my reportings on this. We know that Pope Air Force personnel have been redeployed. The planes are going with them. They're everywhere. And then we see the Navy being deployed, and they have been for 5 years. A lot of people don't realize this, that we have had an ongoing series of naval war games that have never stopped for 5 years, almost 6 now, where almost every ship on a rotating basis is out to sea, several miles out to sea. We even have proof this is going on from the congressional delegations of California, Oregon, and Washington that have written to the Undersecretary of the Navy protesting these actions on behalf of the sea mammals that are being negatively affected by the sonar involved in these drills. And I have published some of those letters at thecommonsenseshow.com. So we have military just everywhere moving, and it doesn't make a lot of sense until you start looking, what are some of the options? Now, let me get into one thing that people talk about, Rory, that I don't agree with. I'm not saying there's not a Planet X. I don't know. I can't prove it one way or the other. I know some people swear by it, but I've yet to see any proof that sways me in that direction. And even if Planet X coming nearer the Earth, where it supposedly is going to pass between the sun and the Earth, and it's going to cause major volcanoes to erupt, huge tidal waves that'll splash all the way inland to New Mexico and Arizona. What good would it do to have troops on the street? And in the midst of these natural disasters, the troops on the street would be absolutely of no value. So that's one thing. The other thing is when you're moving troops like this, and you're doing it under the pretense of Jade Helm, and I'll give you, this is my alternative hypothesis, is that you could be employing troop maneuvers, and you might be able to move Pope Air Force Base personnel and equipment to an area closer to the Ukraine or Syria or the South China Sea, because you're covering up your troop movements under the guise of a martial law drill, because you're preparing to attack China and Russia. Now, that's not my primary theory, but I can see that as a legitimate hypothesis, and that's kind of my plan B analysis. I'll give you one other one that I'm going to write about. Now, I've talked to Steve Quayle on this. Should I write about this or not? I don't want to look like a raving lunatic. But Rory, there is Project Bluebeam. My dad, who was in naval intelligence, knew about Bluebeam, told me about Bluebeam back in the early 80s. It's been around forever. And what Project Bluebeam is, and Steve Quayle and I talked about that interview that you referenced, Project Bluebeam is a simulated alien invasion of the planet. Now, I said simulated. We have such high-tech electronic equipment, we can actually, as Steve Quayle said on my show the other night, actually make it look like you're in the midst of a battlefield and you couldn't tell if it was real or not. And what would be the objective of such an activity? Planet unification, kind of theme of the movie Independence Day. So there's a lot that's been connected to Jade Helm. But I still go to this, okay? Occam's razor. Simplest answer is usually the most correct. Economic collapse, necessity for martial law. That's where I see this going.
I love Occam's razor for that very reason. The simplest answer is usually the correct one, and I would have to agree with what you just said, that they're looking for a way to cover their tracks for the economic collapse that is absolutely inevitable. I mean, you can't get around it. It is mathematically impossible to get around it. I mean, nothing is working, and in particular, the American people, they're not working. So, and
25% of us, according to Shadow Stats,
exactly
are not working. I want to bring up something else too that's part of this. Once we have an economic collapse, you have the chaos that'll ensue. That's when I expect ISIS to act, and they'll make the chaos increase exponentially. And we have a well-documented presence of an ISIS base camp 8 miles from El Paso. And you say, how do you know that? From the documents that Judicial Watch has uncovered. I also have reports from 2 Border Patrol agents that I made contact with almost a year ago, who tell me 40 miles away, there's another ISIS base camp. In fact, they think there's as many as 4. Now, ISIS is paramilitarily trained in this hemisphere outside San Salvador. My source on that is a DEA man who I believe will be going public before much longer. He's been a source of mine off and on since last July. They train down there. They get great weaponry from a group called the Sanchez Paredes, which is the biggest drug cartel in the world. It's effectively the Peruvian army, who we have trained, and they get their lock, stock, and barrel from the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Hezbollah, and they're all tied in now with the drug cartels. And we have government documents dating back to 2007 that prove these associations. So ISIS, although I don't believe they could stand a chance in open warfare against our American military, they're capable of coming across the border and attacking police stations, fire stations, taking over small towns, just wreaking havoc. And I have it well documented. They've been trying to obtain nuclear weapons. And I do believe that we could see nuclear detonations at the hands of ISIS on American soil. And my number one candidate for a choice for a city would be Chicago. And let me just share with you why I've come to believe this. And I've been saying this now since May of 2012. So over 3 years ago, I first said this. I became suspicious when Rahm Emanuel, like father, like son, with his Mossad connections, left a senior White House position to go be the mayor of the city. That didn't make any sense to me. And then you look at in May of 2012, the UN, NATO, at a NATO conference in South Chicago, actually practiced for a nuclear detonation in the city. That by itself doesn't prove a lot. But then we enter the fact that Obama has gotten out of Dodge, so to speak. He sold his home in Hyde Park, Chicago. His permanent residence will be in Hawaii. That doesn't prove anything, but you're starting to see a lot of dots up there. What ties all this together in my mind is a man named Jeff Joe Black. And Jeff approached me, somewhere around 2.5, 3 years ago, and he said he had proof that Rahm Emanuel was put in place in Chicago to oversee, facilitate, and cover up a false flag nuclear explosion. He gathered enough evidence that I thought was interesting. For example, the fact that officials in Gary, Indiana, right across from Chicago, were complaining because they hadn't been compensated because they were ordered to store 500,000 FEMA coffins. So that started getting my attention, and he had a lot of other facts. I scheduled Jeff to come on my show, and a week before, he calls me and says, Dave, my life's in danger. I'm going dark. I'm leaving the country. I'm really sorry to do this to you. He resurfaced again the following year. And unfortunately for him, he decided he was going to start talking, and he did. He also called me, and again, we made another arrangement for him to be on my show. He was a no-show. I thought, this is odd. I couldn't get a hold of him. Well, sometime later, people from We Are Change Chicago that he was a member of sent me an article from a town in Pennsylvania that showed that Jeff Joe Black was either thrown or jumped from a bridge onto a highway and was killed. Now, it was reported initially as an accident, yet the newspaper article I have said it was being investigated as a homicide. This sent chills up and down my spine, and I thought, why would this man be dead under such mysterious circumstances? I thought he was kind of a nut when he went into hiding the first time. Oh, you're not that important, Jeff. They're not going to come after you. And boy, to Jeff, who can hear me from above, I deeply and sincerely apologize for doubting you. So I think Chicago could be a primetime target for these reasons. And I do believe we are going to see one or more nuclear detonations on American soil. And my prime candidate is ISIS, because they've been approaching groups like the Pakistani government and asking for help in procuring nuclear weaponry. And we have a wide open border from the stretch of El Paso area where the ISIS base camp is that we know about. 47 miles west, there are no border patrol agents. I wrote an article about this, and people went up and down the border, and they couldn't find one border patrol agent. ISIS can simply flow into this country. Now, you know that a border patrol helicopter was fired on last week.
Yes.
And as a result, what I found out was what the media was putting out was not true. This helicopter was fired upon inside the United States. And to me, this is not the MO of drug coyotes and cartel, drug sellers. That's not really their MO, is to start firing on helicopters. To me, I suspect this was ISIS and ISIS people moving to what I've been told by locals. The Border Patrol was investigating the fact that there were vehicles sitting on a state highway road in a remote area, and these people who fired on this helicopter were moving in that direction. And I think that is strongly suggestive of the fact that ISIS is clearly making its way into this country, and we're not doing anything to stop it.
Well, my concern with ISIS, or my whole thing with ISIS, is that it's a CIA born operation. I mean, it was born out of Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda was the brainchild of Brzezinski and that whole ilk of evil people.
Mm-hmm.
And anything is
Well,
possible with ISIS, anything at all. I mean, because they're CIA, they're manufacture terrorism. We need terrorism. We need a boogeyman. And I agree with you, Dave, that I think that there's going to be a couple of dirty bombs that are set off in this country. I really do. I don't know when, but that's what I believe.
I'll bring this even closer to home. ISIS got its start because we had military equipment left behind in Iraq. Now, this is just military withdrawal 101. A military commander who would not destroy weaponry left behind would be court-martialed and drummed out of the military. This is a huge no-no. I can't emphasize what my military sources have said. You would never think, unless you were bugging out to save your life, you would never leave military equipment behind. And even in that scenario, you'd still try to destroy as much as you could. So we well supplied Al Qaeda, and it was intentional. And you never heard about any generals taking the fall for that. So that's a CIA op. But where this gets solidified was from a man named Scott Bennett, who I've interviewed a couple of times now. Scott Bennett is a former officer of Army Special Operations Forces. And Scott Bennett not only says that the CIA is funding and controlling ISIS, he can name the Swiss bank accounts of which they're transferring the money to ISIS and the men who control them. He came on my show and named names. Now, he was on for 2 hours. We got knocked off the air in the second hour when we were talking about this on satellite. The satellite's on the East Coast. The server is on the West Coast. And this has never happened to our satellite provider. It's been in business over 2 decades. Fortunately for us, the archives survived, as did the listen by phone option. Now, as soon as Scott left the air and we went to our health segment and our news segment in the third hour of our 3-hour show, all of a sudden everything was okay. So this, going back to what Scott Bennett has said, to me, there is no question that the CIA is controlling ISIS, and what ISIS is going to do to the United States people is a CIA operation.
Yeah, see, and to me that ties into what we've been discussing already as far as Jade Helm and the cover for the economic collapse and opening the door for martial law. I mean, you don't order that many, billions of rounds of hollow point bullets without a purpose. You don't order all of this military equipment for the Department of Homeland Security. Homeland, which is a Nazi term, but they're supposed to be looking out for us. And now they have weaponry in place to fire on us, literally. The whole thing just stinks. I mean, and during your interview with Steve Quell, you guys got to talking about the spiritual aspect of our lives and what is happening. What can I do? What can we do as individuals, as people of faith? What should we be doing at this point? How can we collectively bring prayer to the table in a focused manner in order to make a change? The only way to make the change, in my opinion, it's been scientifically proven that prayer impacts everything if it's directed, and the more people that you have that are focused on it, the stronger the signal is. Have I just wandered off into the weeds, or
No,
help me out here?
not at all. Let me preface my answer to your question and statement by saying this. I have a friend named Vance Davis. I don't get to talk to Vance much anymore, but he used to be an NSA operative when he was in the military. And then I had another friend who used to be on my show a lot, and Vance has been on my show as well, AC Griffith, NSA guys. And they told me independently of each other that part of their training included an education statement that said that what's going on here on this planet is the manifestation of a spiritual warfare that's going on in the cosmos. And it's ultimately a fight of good versus evil. And so when people read the Bible and don't take it literally, that we're really dealing with the prince of darkness and Satan, take this literally. This is exactly what we're up against. And right now, Satan is largely in charge of the planet. Now, to your point about what can we do to pray, I've actually been saying this in several of my articles recently, that we do need to be praying. And you're absolutely right, Rory, about the scientific proof. By my count, there are about 17 studies that show that you can affect healing at a distance with prayer.
Yes.
And some of these studies are double-blind studies. Well done. Now, I used to teach research at the graduate level, so I have to put a caveat in here, and it's this, that when you do a meta-analysis of several research studies together, you run a statistical test where you get an equation that says P equals, and you want it to say less than 0.05. And what that means is if you keep running these same studies over and over, eventually you're going to get to where every research study pretty much that meets your criteria for rigor is going to be at 0.05 or less. Your results have less than a 5% chance of being due to luck. So what we have here in these multitude of prayer studies is not the P equals 0.05. Now, that doesn't mean that's because the concept is not valid. It means we haven't done enough research. Unfortunately, the way that research money is doled out in this country is you either get it from the corporations that take their money to the universities and say, run research on this. But more frequently, you get the government or their third-party interests that fill coffers these research universities, and that's where they do the work. Unfortunately, since Satan is in control, and I believe the Obama administration is the manifestation of Satan in government, they're not going to fund studies that will show prayer in the name of Jesus Christ affects change in anything. So what we rely on are the little bit of studies that trickle out here and there. They're largely privately funded. But the trend curve is obvious, and I can say this without hesitation. The trend curve says this, that it appears likely that mass prayer can affect physical changes in the environment at a distance. And both kinds of prayers work, whether it's intercessory prayer or thy will be done kind of prayer, both work. Although the research is starting to show thy will be done research is a little more effective in getting results in mass. Now, I know it's a long-winded answer to your question, but I want the listening audience to be aware that there is scientific justification for prayer. Now, some people who are Christians are mad at me, and they say, Dave, you can't mix science with religion. And my answer is, well, who do you think invented science? God gave us this beautiful universe to live in that's governed by his scientific principles. So all we're doing is researching what God's already put into place. It's not a contradiction of faith.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and I didn't mean to laugh, but I just find that amusing that science and faith can't mix. I have to disagree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, that doesn't make sense at all. I mean, if you believe that God, that there's a creator God, and that creator God created everything, then that would include science. That would include that would include logical thought, critical thought, and the thought that it takes in order to come up with the formula, just like you just described.
Well, the words of Jesus have said it so many times that the powers that he possessed could be our powers too, to paraphrase many places in the Bible. And I believe prayer is the major avenue to accessing the power that the Almighty has made available to us if we only know how to use the tools.
Use the tools. Well, I think that would be a great spot to stop at, Dave. And I certainly appreciate all your time. We've been going at this for close to an hour now, but I wanted to leave it on a positive note. I really did. I
Yes.
mean, we've been talking about some dire situations here. We need solutions. If we just dwell on the problem and don't look at the solution, then all we have is a problem. So, is it the solution that everybody's going to accept? I don't know. That's up to the individual. But we're giving you an option here. That's for sure.
Well, when you see the alien movies where the aliens are winning, where do you find the people going to? Oftentimes they go to church.
Exactly.
And people turn that to the church and to God as a last resort. And almost to that point. I mean, we're going to see a revival. The problem is it going to be a revival that's in time where God will still hear our prayers? Because he has, in my opinion, cast judgment upon this nation. We've murdered 53 million babies since Roe v. Wade. God is thoroughly disgusted with how we live, our decadence. We're worse than Rome in many ways. And what we need to be doing right now as a nation is repenting individually and in mass and engaging in prayer so that the will of God is done. And if we did this, I believe the globalists would disappear in the night.
I believe that as well. I mean, it drives out corruption. I mean, faith and prayer drive out corruption. There's no room for criminal activity when you are involved in faith, in real prayer, period. So, we've been speaking with Dave Hodges from the commonsenseshow.com. And Dave, why don't you tell them about your radio show as well?
My radio show has a new time. We're on 8 p.m. Eastern Time to 11 p.m., and that's 5 p.m. Pacific. And the best way to tune in is simply go to my website, click the Listen to Dave button, and there it is. And I also advertise inside my articles how you can listen by phone and using different players. 7 p.m. Eastern every Sunday evening.
Every Sunday evening from 8
Yes.
to 11 Eastern. Well, that's perfect. Once again, I really appreciate all your time, Dave, and this has been great. And I really hope that we can do this again in the not too distant future. I want to try to stay ahead of the curve on this Jade Helm thing. I mean, it's supposed to be going live in July. As you stated, it went live in March, and I just don't want it. I don't want there to be too much time in between the updates as far as what's happened and what you see coming next.
I'd be happy to come back.
All right, Dave. Well, have a wonderful evening, and I will talk with you soon, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Rory.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.